From your ears to your heart, we bring the light of knowledge to illuminate your life. ilmwaves.com, where we make ilm possible.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa sallallahu wa sallam ala rasulillah. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla wa anta ya hayyu ya qayyum taj'alul hazna idha shi'ta sahla. I start off by praising Allah, Lord of the worlds, and I humbly ask Him to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and protect his nation from that which he fears for it. Thereafter, brothers and sisters, I welcome you. Barakallahu feekum. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we will continue explaining this blessed book that we are explaining. It is the 40 Hadith of Imam an-Nawawiyy radiyallahu anhu. May Allah raise his rank. We have reached the 6th Hadith. Insha'Allah, we will explain it and we will go over the meanings. Firstly, I will read it in Arabic and then in English, and then we will go over the meanings bi'idhnillah. Barakallahu feekum. قال الحافظ محي الدين يحيى بن شرف النووي رحمة الله تعالى عليه الحديث السادس عن أبي عبد الله النعمان بن بشير رضي الله عنهما أنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس فمن اتقى الشبهات فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع في الشبهات وقع في الحرام كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب رواه البخاري ومسلم. The 6th Hadith from the route of Abu Abdillah an-Nu'man ibn Bashir, may Allah accept both of their deeds, who said, I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam say, the lawful matters are clearly stated and the forbidden matters are clearly stated, and in between them there are matters that many people do not know the judgment of. Hence, the one who avoids falling into the questionable matters would protect his religiosity and integrity. The one who falls into the questionable matters will fall into the unlawful, just like the shepherd grazing his flock around a fenced property, and who very likely will cross over into it. Indeed, every king has his own protected property, and indeed the boundaries that Allah ordered not to be violated are the forbidden matters. Indeed, there is a bloody small part in the body. When it is sound, the entire body will be sound. And if it is spoiled, the entire body will be spoiled. Indeed, it is the heart. Narrated by al-Bukhari and Muslim. And this is a very important hadith which forms the basis for many matters in Islam, and it's very important that we understand it properly. And Abu Dawood, the great scholar, said that there are 4 hadiths that are the foundation for the religion. And among those 4 hadiths, he mentioned this one that we are on right now. So this shows the importance of understanding it, of comprehending its meanings, and implementing what is mentioned in this hadith. May Allah, the Exalted, make us among those who implement this hadith, insha'Allah, and make it enter their hearts. Ameen. And the companion who narrated this hadith was young when he heard this hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This hadith is from this companion, and he was born about 8 years and 8 months before the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam passed away. So he was a child, he was young when he first heard this hadith from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. So when the Prophet passed away, this companion was young and he wasn't even mukallaf at this time yet. So he was not accountable at the moment when he heard this hadith from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And even though he was young, his father would bring him to the sessions of the Prophet alayhi salam so that he could benefit from these hadith and so that he can narrate it later on when he gets older. And that is exactly what happened in this situation. He was about 8 years old when he first heard this hadith from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And then when he got older, he started narrating this hadith that he heard when he was a child. Radiyallahu anhu. Now someone might ask, is it valid for a person to narrate a hadith that he learned before he was even pubescent? Like, this is a question that might pop into some people's minds. If a child hears a hadith, a wording from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, is it valid for him to narrate what he heard when he was a child when he gets older? And the answer to that is yes, he is allowed. And of course there are certain conditions. For example, the child needs to understand and he needs to memorize the wording of the hadith so that he can convey it. Right? So he has to memorize the wordings that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said when he first heard this hadith. And there are other conditions, but this is an example. So yes, it is valid for a child who heard a hadith when he is not pubescent to narrate this hadith later on with certain conditions, as we mentioned in this example. And this hadith that we are explaining is a perfect example of that, because you have this young companion and you have al-Bukhari and Muslim both narrating this hadith from him. Right? So you have these two great scholars of Islam in hadith still narrating this hadith from this companion, even though he heard this hadith when he was a child. And this companion narrated 114 hadith from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and 10 of these 114 were narrated by both al-Bukhari and Muslim. And the narrator of this hadith, he is a companion, and his father is also a companion. His father's name is Bashir ibn Sa'ad, and his mother is also a companion, mashallah. And her name is Amratu bintu Rawaha. Amratu bintu Rawaha. And she is the sister of Abdullah ibn Rawaha. He is the one who fought in the battle of Mu'tah. And this companion, the narrator of the hadith, an-Nu'man ibn Bashir, he was the governor of Damascus and Kufa. Then he was removed from those areas and appointed over Hims. And during his rule over Hims, Nu'man pled allegiance to Abdullah ibn Zubair, and some people of Hims went against him, subhanallah. And the one who killed him, who killed Nu'man, his name is Khalid al-Khula'i. Khalid al-Khula'i. He was among the people of Hims. He followed Nu'man once and he killed him. Radiyallahu anhu. May Allah raise his rank. And there is still a place in Syria, in that area, that is called Ma'arratun Nu'man. Ma'arratun Nu'man. And why is it called that? In honor of this great companion, an-Nu'man ibn Bashir. May Allah raise his rank. And he was young, mashaAllah. He was a young companion, and there's not much about him in the history books. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in this hadith, he said, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّن, that the halal is bayyin, that it is clearly stated. And this is in reference to certain ahkam, certain judgments in Islam. These judgments are clearly stated in the Quran and in the hadith. For example, the food that is slaughtered by the people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, this is a judgment that eating their food that they slaughtered, if it's slaughtered properly, is halalun bayyin, that it is permissible and it is clearly stated in the Quran, in the hadith and in the Islamic text. So you have different ahkam. Certain ahkam are haram bayyin, and we'll get to that next. And you have certain ahkam that are halal bayyin, that are halal and they have been clearly stated in the Islamic text. And an example of that is the food that is slaughtered properly by the people of the book. Now, if a person were to analyze the Islamic text, they would find the judgment of the permissibility of eating the food slaughtered properly by Ahlul Kitab, by the people of the book, that it's mentioned in the Islamic text, in the Quran and the Hadith. So this is an example of a halal, something that is permissible, and that it is bayyin, that it is clearly stated in the Islamic texts. And then he said, alayhi salatu wassalam, وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّن, that just as we have a halal that is bayyin, that is clearly stated, we also have a haram that is bayyin, that is clearly stated, that it is not permissible. For example, the verse حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ, that it's not permissible to engage in any relationships with your mothers or your daughters. Now this is something which is haram, and the haram, the judgment of it being haram is bayyin. It is clearly stated in the Quran and in the Islamic text. And this is an example of something that is haram, that is bayyin. So just as we have halal that is bayyin, we have something that is haram and it is bayyin. Now you might have something that is haram for either a mafsadatun zahira or a mafsadatun khafiyya. Something might be haram for either a mafsadatun zahira, which is a negative effect that is apparent. It's obvious, the negative effect and the consequences of this thing, and that's why it is haram. For example, alcohol. Right? The negative effects of alcohol are clearly visible and it's very obvious the harmful effects that alcohol has to a person, to the family, to the community. So this is a mafsadatun zahira, a negative effect that is obvious. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said about alcohol, innaha ummul khabath, innaha ummul khabath, that it is the mother of all filth. Subhanallah, may Allah ta'ala protect us from this. And then you have something that is mafsadatun khafiyya, something might be haram for a mafsadatun khafiyya, for negative effects that are not apparent, that are not obvious. For example, an animal that is slaughtered by a fire worshipper and an animal that is slaughtered by a Muslim. Now the animal that is slaughtered by the Muslim is permissible, it's halal to eat. As for the animal that is slaughtered by the fire worshipper, it's not permissible to eat. Now someone might ask, what's the difference? These two people, maybe they slaughtered in the same area, maybe they used a similar knife. What's the difference between this one and the Muslim, for example? Now this is, so the food that was slaughtered by the fire worshipper is not permissible, and the negative effects of it are not obvious to us, that are not clear for an individual, for example. So this is an example of something that is haram for a mafsadatun khafiyya. Okay, so we have reasons for why things are haram. Maybe it's obvious and maybe they are not. But still we follow the rules of the Islamic text. Hakada insha'Allah. And then the Prophet ﷺ said in the Hadith, وَبَيْنَهُمَا مُشْتَبِهَاتٍ لَا يَعْلَمُهُنَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. That in between the halal that is bayyin and the haram that is bayyin, there is something called the mushtabihat. لَا يَعْلَمُهُنَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. That many people do not know the judgment of these mushtabihat. So we have three matters in this hadith. We have the judgment of the halal that is bayyin, we have the haram that is bayyin, and we have the mushtabihat. So these mushtabihat, what is the judgment of these mushtabihat? Is it haram or is it halal? Right, there's a difference of opinion to this, and inshallah we will explain these difference in opinions. So some scholars said that these mushtabihat are haram because of what was mentioned in the hadith right after it. After the Prophet ﷺ said, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. And the one who avoids these mushtabihat has protected his religion, meaning he hasn't fallen into haram. وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. And the one who falls and commits these mushtabihat has committed an unlawful matter. He has fallen into the haram. So because of what was mentioned right after this mushtabihat in the hadith, the scholars of Islam said that the judgment of these mushtabihat, the one who commits them, the one who falls into them, has fallen into something that is haram. But some scholars said that these mushtabihat are not halal and they are not haram, they are permissible. So they did not say it was halal, nor did they say it's haram, and they used the same proof. In this hadith, there is another part of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, كَالرَّاعِي يَرْعَى حَوْلَ الْحِمَى يُوشِكُ أَن يَرْتَعَ فِيهِ. Like the shepherd grazing his flock around a property, and who very likely will cross over into it. So over here the Prophet ﷺ is comparing the one who falls into these mushtabihat, that he is like the shepherd who is grazing his flock around a property that belongs to someone else. So what's most likely to happen? What's most likely to happen? That these sheep will cross over into the other property. So likewise, the one who falls into these mushtabihat, and according to this saying they're not halal and they're not haram, he's putting himself in a situation where he is more likely to fall into something that is haram because he's committing these mushtabihat. Okay, so there are two different sayings. Some scholars said that it's haram, and some scholars said they are not halal and they are not haram, but we should avoid them, inshallah. Hopefully it is clear. So now, according to the second saying that these mushtabihat are not haram, so what is the meaning of the hadith, this part of the hadith where he said, alayhi salam, وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ, that the one who falls into these shubuhat has fallen into something that's haram. Right? So according to the second saying, what is the meaning of this? The Prophet over here said the one who falls into the shubuhat has fallen into the haram. But how can you say that these mushtabihat are not haram and the Prophet is mentioning that these are haram? So the scholars of Islam explained this and they interpreted it, and they said what is meant by this part of the hadith is that the one who falls into these mushtabihat is most likely going to fall into haram. Right? So over here, the Prophet didn't mean that the one who falls into these mushtabihat has committed haram. He meant that the one who commits these mushtabihat is likely to fall into the haram. meaning that this mushtabihat will lead him to fall into something that is haram. Right? So the meaning is that these shubuhat, these mushtabihat will lead this individual to committing something that's haram. And it doesn't mean that these mushtabihat, it's haram. So that is how the scholars of Islam explain this part of this hadith according to the second saying. And what was mentioned right after this strengthens and supports that these mushtabihat are not haram. Because what did the Prophet ﷺ mention? We mentioned it. He mentioned the example of the shepherd grazing his flock. Right? So you have the hima. If you notice in the hadith, the word hima is used. And the hima of the malik, of the king, is his boundaries. So a king might have a piece of land that has boundaries so that his animals can graze on it, and he prevents other people from grazing on his property. Now the one who falls into these mushtabihat is like the person who does this. The one who takes his shepherd, the one who takes his sheep near the hima, the boundaries of a king. And just as the person cannot guarantee that he can prevent his animals from mixing and thus exposing himself to the power of the king, likewise the one who falls into these mushtabihat can lead him to falling into haram and exposing himself to the punishment and torture of Allah. So just like a person puts a great distance between himself and the boundaries of a king for a property that belongs to him, likewise the person should stay away and put a great distance between himself and these things that lead to the haram, meaning these mushtabihat, because they lead to haram. And a person should stay away from it. Like if there's an individual near the edge of a cliff, is he going to go closer to the edge? No, he's not. Is he going to go and start playing on the edge of the cliff? He wouldn't. Right? He puts a distance between himself and the edge. Why? Logically, why would a person do that? Because the closer he gets to it, the more likely he is going to fall over the cliff. And likewise, the person stays away from these mushtabihat because they can lead him to falling into the haram. Wa'udhu billah. Now the intelligent Muslim, the intelligent individual, he puts himself in a situation that is good for him. He doesn't put himself in a situation where he can harm himself. And it was narrated by al-Bukhari and Muslim that they narrated from Safiya bint Huyay, and she is the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, that she came to the Prophet while he was in the masjid. And they spoke to each other. The Prophet ﷺ spoke to her and she spoke to him. Then he walked her back to the door of the masjid. And there were two people from the Ansar that were walking by, and it was dark. So they began to walk fast when they saw the Prophet ﷺ with this figure, with this individual they didn't know. And they didn't know who this female was. Now the Prophet ﷺ told them to walk slowly. She is Safiya. So the Prophet ﷺ saw that they were walking faster, and he told them to walk slow, and he informed them that this female that is with the Prophet is his wife. And they said, Subhanallah, we do not think bad of you, O Messenger of Allah. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, Inni khashitu alaykum ash-shaytan, that I feared the shaitan would come to you too and trick you too. Inna ash-shaytana yajri min ibni Adam majra ad-dami fil uruq. Majra ad-dami fil uruq. That verily the shaitan runs in the body of the human just as blood runs through his veins. Subhanallah. The Prophet ﷺ, he was worried for them that the shaitan will come to them and make waswas and try to trick them and try to deceive them and to make them think bad of the Prophet ﷺ. And the one who thinks that it's possible for the Prophet ﷺ to commit a sin like this, a'udhu billah, to be in khalwa and to be doing these things, this leads to blasphemy, and this is kufr, because the Prophet ﷺ is protected from committing these type of sins. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ told them that. And I would like to emphasize and clarify that these two companions did not think bad of the Prophet ﷺ, but they decided to walk faster. And the Prophet ﷺ feared for them that the shaitan would come to them after and make them have these bad thoughts. So it's very important to understand that about these companions. And in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is comparing the closeness of the shaitan to us to the closeness of blood in our veins. Subhanallah. Now you can imagine the proximity and the closeness of blood that we have in our bodies. Subhanallah. It is extremely close. And the Prophet ﷺ is comparing the shaitan to that. So you can imagine the effect that he has on us, and that he's always there trying to find a way to deceive us and to trick us. Subhanallah. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. So we need to be careful, and we should not thrust ourselves and put ourselves into questionable matters. We should not put ourselves in situations which might harm us. Right? This initial situation might not be haram to be in this situation or do this thing, but it is something that is questionable, and it is something that might lead you to falling into something that is haram. So we have to help ourselves by not doing these questionable matters and not even approaching it. Allah Ta'ala said to Prophet Adam and his wife, وَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَا مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. And do not even approach this tree. Right? Allah Ta'ala didn't say do not eat from this tree. He said do not even approach it. Do not put yourself close to this tree. Why? Because it might lead you to doing something that is haram. They say in Arabic, al-ma'siyatu baridul kufr, that the ma'siyah, the sin, might lead to blasphemy. Subhanallah. You might have a sin, and this small sin might lead to a major sin. And you might have a major sin, and this major sin might lead you to committing kufr. Subhanallah. For the example, you have khalwa, right? To stay alone with a marriageable person, alone with there's no third person that a person is shy from. You have this khalwa with another individual, and then khalwa leads to what? To zina. Right? A lot of the times you have people falling into adultery and fornication because they are just alone without a third person who they are shy from. So khalwa over here, what did it do to these two individuals? It might lead them to committing zina. Subhanallah, al-ma'siyatu baridul kufr. That a sin might lead to something worse. It might lead to kufr. It might lead to a major sin. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. Allah said in the Quran, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Do not even come close to zina. Do not approach it. Do not put yourselves in a situation where you will be close to zina. Stay away from those things that lead to zina. Yani, this is what it means. For example, the khalwa, the places, the haram places where you have free mixing and you have individuals who look to commit zina or find people to commit zina in these locations. So do not, over here Allah Ta'ala, He didn't say do not commit zina. He said do not approach it. Do not even put yourselves close to it. Yani, what does this mean? That we need to stay away from the causes, the things that lead to for a person to committing zina. A'udhu billah. Like the khalwa. So we need to keep away from all sins, because you never know where this small sin, for example, might lead you to. It might lead you to something worse. It might lead you to a major sin. It might lead you to committing blasphemy. Wa'udhu billah. A'udhu billah. May Allah protect us. Allah the Exalted said in the Quran, وَيَقْتُلُونَ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. That they killed the prophets and they did not have the right to do so. Subhanallah. Yes, some of the Banu Israel, they killed the prophets of Allah. A'udhu billah. And now, what led them to killing a prophet? And this is not an ordinary person. This is not a regular person that they killed. They killed a prophet, one of the prophets of Allah and multiple prophets of Allah. And what led them to this final outcome? ذَلِكَ بِمَا عَصَوْا وَكَانُوا يَعْتَدُونَ. That is because of the sins that they were committing. Yani that these individuals, they committed sin after sin after sin until they found it easy to kill a prophet of Allah. A'udhu billah. Yani, so what does this show us? That a sin might lead a person to do something that is worse. You might see this as a small sin, but Allah Ta'ala knows best what this small sin might lead you to commit in the future. That is why we stay away from these sins, whether they are small, and we do not put ourselves in situations where we might fall into a sin. Subhanallah. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. And shuf, I'll give you an example. I'll mention an example of how a person, he might do something, and then later on he will not care about it. For example, say you have an individual, and he goes out for Eid. You know the Eid, the 2 Eids that we have. He goes out for one of them, and what does a person usually do on the day of Eid? He wears nice, clean clothing. So you have this person, he goes out for Eid wearing this clean clothing, and he has to walk a certain distance. And at the beginning, he's going to be very cautious for himself not to get anything on his clothing, on his white thobe. Right? An individual, this is how he is usually. So he begins to walk, then all of a sudden he gets some dust on it, then some dirt, then some more dust, and some more dirt, and then mud comes on it. Now what's going to happen to him? At the beginning he was very cautious, and he would avoid every corner, every crevice, try to make sure that he didn't get anything on him. But now that he has fallen and he has gotten dirt and mud on him, he's not going to care. At the beginning he cared, but now after a while he doesn't care. And likewise, brothers and sisters, the person who falls into a small sin, he has dirtied himself, he has filthied himself. So what's going to happen to him? He will begin to not care about it. He's going to tell himself, okay, I fell into a sin, whatever. Later on he'll fall into another small sin, and then he falls into a major sin, then he falls into another major sin, and then he starts keep going like this until he falls into blasphemy. A'udhu billah. And this is a possibility, and there are many stories of individuals who this was their outcome. May Allah protect us, ya ahbabana, haqiqatan. May Allah ta'ala protect us. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said in a hadith narrated by al-Bukhari, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الرَّجُلَ يَسْرِقُ الْبَيْضَةَ فَتُقْطَعُ يَدُهُ وَيَسْرِقُ الْحَبْلَ فَتُقْطَعُ يَدُهُ. That, and this person in this hadith is cursed. The Prophet said that Allah curses this individual. And who was this individual that is mentioned in the hadith? Alladhi, and he is the person, يَسْرِقُ الْبَيْضَةَ. He is the man, the person who steals a baydah. فَتُقْطَعُ يَدُهُ. And baydah means egg. So what happens to him in the hadith? It mentioned that he steals an egg and then has his hand cut off. Now those of you who have learned the obligatory knowledge know that the judgment of having your hand severed is for stealing, is not for stealing an egg. Yani if a person steals an egg, he doesn't have this punishment, right? There are certain conditions. For example, he needs to steal what is equivalent to rub'u dinar, what is equivalent to 1/4 of a dinar, right? So there are conditions. So simply just stealing an egg in Islam doesn't mean you're going to have your hand cut off. So what does it mean in the hadith? The Prophet said the person steals an egg and then has his hand cut off. Yani that a person will steal an egg and then he falls into this sin. So what happens? He falls into another sin of stealing. And then he steals again until he eventually steals the equivalent of rub'u dinar, of something that is equal to 1/4 of a dinar. So we have here a perfect example of an individual stealing, and then this sin leads to another sin, until it leads him to a worse sin, subhanallah. And he falls into the punishment of having his hand severed. And the same thing in the rest of the hadith, the Prophet said, وَيَسْرِقُ الْحَبْلِ فَتُقْطَعُ يَدُهُ, that he steals a rope and will have his hand cut off. And the same explanation, that a person will steal this rope and then he keeps on stealing until he steals the equivalent of rub'u dinar, of 1/4 of a dinar, and then falls into the punishment of having his hand cut off. A'udhu billah, subhanallah. Now this is a very clear example that one sin might lead to another, and might lead to another until something worse. Right? As we mentioned earlier, al-ma'siyatu baridul kufr, that the ma'siyah leads to blasphemy. Yani a ma'siyah might lead to another sin, into another sin, and it might lead to a major sin, and it might lead to blasphemy, subhanallah. May Allah ta'ala protect us. Ameen. And do you know what happens to your heart when you commit a sin? Do you know what happens to it? Subhanallah. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إِذَا عَصَى الْعَبْدُ رَبَّهَا نُكِتَ فِي قَلْبِهِ نُكْتَةً سَوْدَاء فَإِذَا تَابَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ سُقِي لَهُ. That the slave, when he disobeys his Lord, that his heart will turn black because of that. And if he repents, that black mark goes away. Subhanallah. Look at the mercy of Allah. And if you fall into a sin, it has an effect on your heart. And there's a certain blackness that overcomes your heart, subhanallah, and we do not want this, for this to happen to our hearts. But if a person does fall into a sin, and then he repents and he asks Allah Ta'ala to forgive him, that blackness goes away, subhanallah. And in the continuation of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَلَا وَإِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ. That verily in the heart, in the body, is a piece of flesh. إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ. If this piece of flesh turned good, if it was good, then the whole body will be good. MashaAllah. And the Prophet ﷺ is referring to the heart. He called it mudghah. أَلَا وَإِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً. That verily in the body is a mudghah. And mudghah means something that you chew on. So the Prophet ﷺ called the heart a mudghah because it is the size of something that you eat. MashaAllah. That's why the Prophet called it a mudghah. And if you notice that what the Prophet ﷺ, what he said is true. Honestly, if the heart is filled with knowledge and it's filled with salah, piety, iman, ma'rifah, all of these good things, you'll realize that it has a positive effect on the whole body. Subhanallah. And if it's the opposite, if the heart is filled with ma'asiyah, with sins, with disobedience, with corruption, you will find that the whole body, their other body parts, will be acting and doing things which are not permissible, and they will be doing things that are haram. They will have a negative effect. Because why? The heart is in a bad situation. And you will notice that the heart is the amir of all the body parts. The heart is like a king over the other body parts. And you will notice usually if a king is pious and is righteous and is God-fearing, then the people will be good and they will be also in a good situation. And they will be affected positively. Why? Because of the piety and righteousness of the king. Subhanallah. And likewise, if the heart is bad, you will find the tongue, the hands, the eyes, the private parts, the feet, all of these things will be doing things which are inappropriate, that are haram. Subhanallah. May Allah protect us. And the heart is the one that gives the order to the tongue to speak, the eye to look, the feet to walk. If this heart is filled with iman and good, you will find that the heart orders the body parts to be obedient and to do the good. And if the heart is vice versa, if it's the opposite, you'll notice that it orders these body parts to do things which are heinous and ugly and bad. And a person might have a heart that is in a good situation, but he needs to endeavor in protecting it. He needs to protect his heart. Subhanallah. Why? Because it might change. You might have a good situation, but tomorrow might be different. Why? Because of things that affect your heart. That's why we need to protect our hearts. And how does an individual protect their heart? By putting a filter on the inlets to the heart. Subhanallah. Protect the pathways to your heart. And what do I mean by this? By putting a filter on the eyes, on your ears. Be cautious of what you look at. Be cautious of what you hear. Because these things lead to your heart. They have an effect on a person's heart. Subhanallah. So if you want to be in a good situation, protect your eyes from looking at the haram and by looking at things that are not good. And your ears also, likewise, the same thing applies. A poet once said, ما سمي القلب إلا من تقلبه فاحذر على القلب من قلب وتحويلي. And this means that the heart is called qalb in Arabic because of the taqallub, because it changes from the same derivative, ya ahbabana. It has the qaf, the lam and the ba. So why do they call the heart in Arabic qalb? Because it changes, because there is taqallub, because it has qalb. MashaAllah. And then he continued to say, فَاحْذَرْ عَلَى الْقَلْبِ مِنْ قَلْبِ وَتَحْوِيلِ. So protect your heart, and you protect your qalb from qalb. Protect your heart from changing. Why? Because the heart changes drastically, and it changes, MashaAllah, it changes really quickly. So a person needs to pay attention to himself and protect his heart from changing to a bad situation. And do not forget to make dua that Allah protects your heart. Right? A person might take a proactive approach. He takes every precaution to avoid making his heart affected, but he still needs to make dua. He still should ask Allah the Exalted to protect his heart from changing to a bad situation. And the Prophet ﷺ taught us to mention a dua for this. He taught us to say, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala ta'atik. O you who changes the hearts, keep my heart firm on your religion. Yani this is a dua that should always be on the tip of our tongues, ya ahbabana. Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala ta'atik. O you who changes the hearts, keep my heart firm on your religion. Because Allah Ta'ala is the one who changes the hearts. He is the one who has power over everything. Ya Allah, keep our hearts firm on your religion. And of course the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us this dua, and he himself did not fear that his heart would change to the haram or to a bad situation. Right? The Prophet ﷺ was a teacher. So when he mentioned this dua, he was teaching his nation. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And keep in mind that the heart changes faster than boiling water. The heart changes faster than the boiling water on the kettle. And this was mentioned in the Hadith. So this shows us and this indicates to us how sensitive our hearts are, ya ahbabana, my dear brothers and sisters. So we need to be firm on it. We need to endeavor in protecting these hearts from those negative influences that affect it. Like the sins affect the heart. And sometimes things which might not be haram, but they have a certain attachment to the dunya, will make you more inclined to the dunya. So that is why we need to protect it. And Prophet Isa alayhi sallam, he said something very beautiful. He said the love of the dunya and the love of the akhirah cannot be in the Muslim's heart, just as water and fire cannot be in one container. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That the love of the dunya and the love of the hereafter cannot be in one person's heart completely, just as fire and water cannot be in the same container. And this is a very beautiful analogy from our Prophet Isa alayhi salam, that shows and indicates that a person needs to fill his heart with piety, with righteousness. He needs to put himself around the pious people, the God-fearing the people, those who have good manners and good etiquettes, those individuals who encourage you to do the good. Because these people will have an effect on your heart, and they will make you more inclined, and they will increase your love for the akhirah. And if someone wants to protect his heart and clean it and purify it, there is one organ specifically that he should look after. He should put more effort in protecting that organ if he wants to have a good heart. And that organ is the tongue. And it is actually the best organ after the heart. There is one of the Arabic poets, he said, لِسَانُ الْفَتَى نِصْفٌ وَنِصْفٌ فُؤَادُهُ فَلَمْ يَبْقَى إِلَّا صُورَةُ اللَّحْمِ وَالدَّمِ Allah, Allah. And over here he basically says as if the person is only two parts. لِسَانُ الْفَتَى نِصْفٌ وَنِصْفٌ فُؤَادُهُ. That half of the individual is his tongue, and half of him, the other half, is the heart. فَلَمْ يَبْقَى إِلَّا صُورَةُ اللَّحْمِ وَالدَّمِ. And other than the heart and the tongue, what remains is just flesh and blood. Haqiqatan, mashallah, that's what he said. فَلَمْ يَبْقَى إِلَّا صُورَةُ اللَّحْمِ وَالدَّمِ. Other than the heart and the tongue, the only thing that remains is flesh and blood. Yani, what he's trying to say is, other than the heart and the tongue, everything else does not matter. The organs are like nothing compared to the heart and to the tongue. So the most important the most important organ is the heart, and the second most important and the best organ is the tongue. So be cautious and exert due diligence in protecting those two organs. And another poet said, إِنَّ الْكَلَامَ لَفِي الْفُؤَادِ وَإِنَّمَا جُعِلَ اللِّسَانُ عَلَى الْفُؤَادِ دَلِيلًا. And this means, verily, al-kalam is in the heart. That speech is in the heart. That's what he said, that the speech is actually in the heart. جُعِلَ اللِّسَانُ عَلَى الْفُؤَادِ دَلِيلًا. And that the tongue was just made as a way to express what is in the heart. So what is he trying to show us? He's trying to tell us that, yes, the tongue has an important role. It has a significant role. But you look to the individual's heart. If you want to find his strength, you want to find the strength of an individual, you look to his heart. And you will find that the tongue expresses what's in the heart. That's why you find individuals who for example, they like basketball, they always talk about basketball. Why? Because in their heart, they have the love of basketball. You find individuals who like soccer, football, and that whenever you meet these individuals, they're always talking about soccer and football. You find individuals who might be sinners, they love women and they love the haram. So whenever they meet each other, what do they talk about? They talk about the haram, they talk about what they did, right? They express what is in the heart, and the tongue does that. So the tongue, what is its purpose? Is to express what's in the heart of an individual. And when you have the opposite, when you have people who love the Prophet, whenever you meet these individuals, what do they talk about? They don't talk about movies, they don't talk about useless information, they talk about the Prophet. And when people love the righteous, pious Muslims, whenever you see them, they tell you something beneficial about a pious, righteous Muslim. Subhanallah. The tongue expresses what is in the heart. So if the heart has khair, it has goodness, it has righteousness, it has ilm, you'll find that the tongue expresses what's in the individual's heart. Subhanallah. Now listen to this next hadith. Subhanallah. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أَصْبَحَ ابْنُ آدَمَ فَإِنَّ الْأَعْضَاءَ كُلَّهَا تَقُولُ لِلِّسَانِ يَا لِسَانُ اتَّقِ اللَّهَ فِينَا. Subhanallah. That every day when the person gets up, when he wakes up, that his a'da, his body parts, they address his tongue. Allahu Akbar. His body parts address his tongue, and they tell the tongue, Ya lisan ittaqillaha fina. O tongue, fear Allah for us. Subhanallah. فإنك إذا استقمت استقمنا وإذا وججت إعوججنا. And this means, verily, if you are straight, then we are straight. Subhanallah. The body parts are addressing the heart, the tongue, and they're saying, فَإِنَّكَ إِذَا اسْتَقَمْتَ اسْتَقَمْنَا. If you are straight and on the right path, we will be straight and we will be on the right path. وَإِذَا وَجَجْتَ إِعْوَجَجْنَا. And if you deviate from the right path, then we will deviate. Subhanallah. And I remind you, brothers and sisters, that the heart is Amirul Jawarih. It is the king or the leader of all the other body parts. Subhanallah. So I advise you and I encourage you to protect your hearts. Protect your hearts by protecting the other inlets. Protect your eyes and protect your tongue. Subhanallah. Some of our brothers and our sisters, they have the habit and tendency to talk about things which are useless, which are redundant and are unproductive, have no positive effects by talking about these things. For example, whenever you see them, they'll talk about a sports, they'll talk about basketball, soccer, football, or they talk about things which are not beneficial. They'll be talking about these major sinners and what they did last night and how many points they scored. And subhanallah, these are things which have an effect on the person's heart. And like we mentioned earlier, when someone has a certain attachment in the heart, they talk about these things and they express it through their tongue. And some of our brothers and sisters, they just like to talk about other individuals. They do not mind their own business. So keep in mind that in order for a person to reach the high ranks, he needs to protect his heart. He needs to keep away from those things which have a negative effect. And do not surround yourself around people who have this negative effect on you and lead you towards something which is not good. The Prophet ﷺ, he said about Abu Bakr, praising him, he said, مَا فَضَلَكُمْ أَبُو بَكْرٍ لَا بِصَلَاةٍ وَلَا صِيَامٍ وَلَكِنْ فَضَلَكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ وَقَرَ فِي قَلْبِهِ. That Abu Bakr, he did not surpass you in prayer and fasting. He did not pray the most out of the companions. He did not fast the most out of the companions. He did not surpass you in fasting and in prayer. This is not how he beat you. How did he beat them? He said, وَلَكِنْ فَضَلَكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ وَقَرَ فِي قَلْبِهِ. Rather, Abu Bakr surpassed you with something that was in his heart, and that is the yaqeen and the certainty. So he was a person who protected his heart, and when he protected his heart, everything else turned out to be positive for him. It had a very good effect on his other body parts, and he reached his highest rank, mashallah, of all the humans other than the prophets. Right? Abu Bakr is the best person after all of the prophets, and this is a great status and rank to attain. May Allah Ta'ala raise his rank and protect him and forgive him. Ya Allah, Ameen. And inshaAllah Ta'ala, we will stop here bi'idhnillah, by the will of Allah. And I ask Allah to protect you and your families from torture of the grave, from the torture in the hereafter, to grant us sincerity in our actions. And I ask Allah to reward us for our endeavors and to reward you for endeavoring and listening, and for those who distribute and those who take part in benefiting the Muslims. Ameen. And I remind you to continue supporting us and to first and foremost make dua for us, inshaAllah. If you are among those who are benefiting from these lessons, make dua for us whenever you hear something beneficial or something that affects you, inshaAllah. And I ask Allah Ta'ala to make us sincere and to make us benefit from one another. Ameen. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you liked it, check out the rest of our series. And donate for the sake of Allah so that we may continue spreading the obligatory knowledge to Muslims all over the world. Barakallahu feekum. May Allah accept your deeds.